In 1967, when the paratroopers captured Harabais, they entered into the old city through the Lion's Gate, made an immediate left turn into the Tribe Gate, onto Harabais, capturing Harabais. And once it was captured, they spent not an insignificant time running around the Har trying to find the doorway to get to the Kotel.
Check out these great clips over here of Michal Weichbrod from Homebound to Eretz-Yisroel with Rabbi Yehuda Leib. We'll watch these clips together, and then we'll talk about what I think is the real reason we're in this mess. So, let's go.
Everyone has the big question. Why is it that all the big gedolim, why do they, not only they don't talk about it, they say it's usher. There's a very big gap between giant mitzvah must be done in order to bring the geula and completely usher, if you go, God will kill you. I mean, literally the biggest gap. So, Yehuda.
I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the gedolim, the ones that you've quoted, have said otherwise. They have very clearly written that it's usher to go. There no longer is the ability for Rabbanim to come together and paskin a gezerah. And Ramesha has a whole tshuva on this, and it's actually really fascinating tshuva to go through. I think Rabbi Aaron Sokol actually in his video recently quoted the same tshuva as well. All right, people are always shocked to hear about how much of the Messiah exists on the fact that the Dome of the Rock is the location of the Eben Shasiah. There's well over 100, close to 200 sources of this.
You think the gedolim don't know what you know? Some guy, he just sends me a text. He said, by the way, I just want to warn you, it's completely usher to go on the Harabais. I said, why? He said, if you go onto the Harabais, you are chayiv karis, period.
In 1967, when the paratroopers captured Harabais, they entered into the old city through the Lion's Gate, made an immediate left turn into the Tribe Gate, onto Harabais, capturing Harabais. And once it was captured, they spent not an insignificant time running around the Har trying to find the doorway to get to the Kotel. Finally, I found it, the Mughrabi Gate, which is literally on the opposite end of Harabais. So if you're entering it from the northeast corner, the Tribe Gate, it's on the southwest corner is the Mughrabi Gate. So it's literally on a diagonal line. Once the war was over, for a few weeks until they cleared the other areas, which wasn't cleared until Shavuos, mind you, another way to get to the Kaisel. The only way to get to the Kaisel was through Harabais, through that route, coming in through the Lion's Gate, left turn into the Tribe Gate, onto the platform of the Temple Mount, and walk around until you get to the Mughrabi Gate and down the Mughrabi Gate to the Kotel, to the western wall. The Rabbanim were obviously scandalized. People are going onto Harabais without going to mikveh, without preparing. Even worse, people were taking shortcuts and were literally going diagonal, direct line over past the Dome of the Rock.
Right, this had nothing to do with Jews going up to pray and going to the mikveh.
They were going to the Kaisel.
They were using it as a road. There was a road literally running across the Harabais, and this was a big problem.
Which itself is a significant lapse of judgment on people's part. Like, you literally have the prize and you're avoiding the prize to get the secondary prize of the Kaisel, which is only special due to its being the outer wall of the Har. But putting that aside, right, and again, we're not judging people. People had the knowledge that they had at the time. The Rabbanim said everybody off the Har. They were very much looking to make sure that everybody off the Har, because people were walking onto the through and near into Machane Shechina. So as Rabbi Ovadia Yosef in his tshuva wrote, and I mean he obviously wrote in his tshuva right away that it's usher to go to Harabais, but in his words in Madanei HaMelech, he's quoted, "Elu shenichnasim lo sholim dat, lo sholim chachma." Those who go in are not consulting wisdom or sage advice. Heim nichnasim b'miskad omer b'fnim. They are entering into the Dome of the Rock. Shehu b'vadai makom ha'echal v'azara. That is certainly the location of the temple and the temple courtyard. So 1 second, what do we see from this verse? He's saying, don't go in because you're certainly entering into that area. Now, he quotes Miskad Omer, which is the Dome of the Rock, right? That is certainly the area. So nobody could ever suggest that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef didn't know where the Beit HaMikdash, where the temple stood, where the Beit HaMikdash stood on Harabais. It's impossible to suggest this. It's also impossible to suggest that Rabbi Yashiv didn't know. And even though in his tshuva he said we didn't know, and Tzitz Eliezer says the same thing, and the Minchas, and other tshuvas that were written at the time, they, in my opinion, and again, this is my opinion, but I've heard this from Rabbeim, that suggest as well that the Rabbanim needed to get people off the har. So they started their halachic process when they wrote their responses on the topic with that bottom line. And generally, halacha works the opposite. You start off with a clean slate, like we discussed with the Sanhedrin. You start off with a clean slate. You learn the sugya, both sides, and you come out. Bottom line, what you rule halachically. In the case of Har Bayis, they already knew that they had to come out with the bottom line that you can't go, that it's usher to go. And they use extreme language, similar to it's usher to use smartphones, and it's usher to go to the beach, and all these other isurim that are on pashkavillions that are written with very strong language, in the hope that they will at least prevent certain people from doing it. Their tshuvas were written trying with the goal of to plant doubt in people in what was until that point a very clear sugya, so that people would be machmer and stay off the har, because once people were going to the har, they were entering into the areas that were forbidden, which was the reality in 67. Today that reality doesn't exist. It does exist, but not for those that are going ka'alacha. Let me explain. When a person goes to Har Bayis today, dressed like a chiloni, dressed like an Arab, dressed like a guy, they will go through security, and then they will go up to the har, and they will be under the guide, the custodianship of the waqf. If they're wearing shorts or not sneeze clothing, the waqf will give them a special skirt to wear for dhimmi status, which is less than Muslim status. And then they are allowed to walk anywhere on the Har Bayis, including into Machan Shechina. They can't enter into any of the buildings. They can't enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Dome of the Rock or any of the other buildings that are on the Temple Mount. If you go looking even remotely like a Jew with a kippah, you will be forced by the police at the entrance to join one of the religious groups. Those religious groups are guarded by police, and they go through a very specific route that is physically impossible to enter anywhere area within Machan Shechina. Okay? Now, the Rabbanim...
These Rabbanim, they gave their Asr Psak before this
long
was the
before
reality.
this was the reality. Long before this was the reality.
And everything since then has just been basically
just repeating,
an
yeah.
echo chamber.
Like with Rabbi Zechariah ben Avtilas, once he said it, everybody falls in line. It's a very similar situation. Once the Big Gedolim said that it's us to go to Har Bayis, many Rabbanim who know that be'emes it's mutter are afraid to publicly give a psak halacha, and they've told this to me personally. I'm talking about big names that you recognize, that you know, that you would consider a gadol.
It kind of looked like this with the Amshenever Rebbe, no?
We saw a little bit of that. When the
sounded like he said something that sounded like he said it was permitted, and then he immediately was attacked, and then he immediately took it back, something along those lines.
And what were the attacks? The attacks were, how dare you go against the previous generation? Look at the words.
They pick out a gadol that they like what he says, and then that's it. Nobody can argue on him because that's...
I'm saying, look at the words of the Sephardic chief rabbi railing against Sar Ben Gvir about going, even though his Rav said to go, and he said, "Does his Rav know better than Rabbi Vadia?" Many Rabbanim, when they wrote their general rules based on the realities that existed in 67 and prior in the 30s when Rav Kook originally put out his ban, people were going everywhere onto Har Bayis, including into Machan Shechina. So, without the capabilities of just building a fence around Machan Shechina, they decided it would be easier to tell people to avoid it completely. Now, there were people at the time who received Piskei Halacha from said Rabbanim to go al pi halacha, or shortly thereafter. This is not meaning the Rabbanim themselves, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, Rabbi Moshe, Rabbi Vadia, Rabbi Eliashiv, all when it came to other Piskei Halacha that were relevant to this topic, all paskin halacha limaisa, like the Vas Messiah, like the Radvaz, like the Chavetz Chaim, like the Pasach Shulchan, like the Bach, like the Shari Tshuva, like the Chida, like the Marit, on and on and on and on and on. You want all the Makaris? Look at the Makar look at the article in Beis Hashem, where I bring all of them in Hebrew and in English, so you could read it and you could decide for yourself. None of this is my own chidushim. I'm not saying anything new here. Everything is well documented. All we're doing is just speaking about what has already been written. As a result, they all pass like that. For example, when it comes to Zaka members going in to remove a dead body from Machan Shechina, the halacha is only a kohen is allowed to remove a dead body from Machan Shechina. Not only a kohen, but better to use a kohen because they have the mitzvah d'oraisa. Now we know a kohen is not allowed to become tamei lames for anybody other than his 7 close relatives, and yet in this particular case, they're supposed to go into Machane Shechina. Now, if you don't know where Machane Shechina is, you cannot tell a Kohen to go in because you have a suffix Machane Shechina. You have a doubt about whether this is the camp of the divine presence. And you cannot allow a priest, a Kohen, to go in to that area unless you know for certain that that's the area. Now, Rabbi Yashiv in his Psak Halacha Tezaka wrote very clearly that we hold by the map of Rabbi Chia Tukachinsky.
If Machane Shechina is the holiest level, why can't? What's the issue? What are they concerned of?
Because because to go into Machane Shechina as a Tamei Mes is better to.
You're saying because we're sending specifically a Kohen.
We're supposed to send the Kohen.
You're only allowed to send the Kohen in because the dead body is in Machane Shechina.
Exactly. Okay. I mean, Chas v'shalom, it shouldn't happen. The last time it happened was that terror attack with the two.
Again, just to clarify, because a lot of people might not be keeping up.
Yes.
Machane Levia is where any Jew can go as long as he went to a mikvah, and because we don't have the paraduma, so whatever. Okay.
No. Machane Levia is mutter for a Tamei Mes. Someone who is Tamei Mes is allowed in Machane Levia, but not allowed in Machane Shechina.
Correct.
Someone who's Tamei Sheyatze min haguf, meaning from any of the flows or fluxes that come out of the body, needs to purify first before going into Machane Levia.
Once we have a paraduma, though.
Once you have a paraduma, then you can go into Machane Shechina. But the only way to get rid of Tumas
if we have the paraduma, then you still don't need a paraduma to go into Machane Levia?
Correct.
Okay, fine. So
you only need a paraduma to go into Machane Shechina. Meaning paraduma gets rid of Tumas Mes. Without paraduma, you can't get rid of Tumas Mes. So unless a Kohen, was born not in a hospital and was makbid to never be in the Metal Mes, and he knows, and even still it's iffy because you can't always fully know, but at least they have a chance of not being Tamei Mes. Anybody who's ever entered into a hospital is Becheskas Tamei Mes, and once you're Tamei Mes, you can't get out of Tumas Mes without a paraduma.
Right.
So we cannot go into Machane Shechina unless as part of a military, or as part of maybe Chavi Knesset, because they're going for Ribonut, but that's a whole different sugya, and that's not what we're focusing on. We're not suggesting that people should or shouldn't. There are big Rabbanim that have dealt with the sugya, including Rabbi Yashiv, and including the Rabbanot, and including all the Rabbanim, many who are publicly stated as being anti those going to Har Bayis. When it comes to this, they have issued their Piskei Halacha, including Rabbi Yashiv about police officers going to the Har. There's a whole thing on Just My Israel status about this, about police officers going to the mikvah, all due to our great efforts of pushing those halachas and teaching those halachas. I remember Rabbi Elisha really working with police officers there to understand why it was so chashuv and critical for them to go to the mikvah, and Baruch Hashem, people are doing it. It's amazing. But that again highlights this idea that if we don't, that the only way there will be more kedusha on the makom is when those who care about halacha go to the makom and treat it with respect. But to answer the question about why the Gedalim said it was aser, or some Gedalim said it was aser, not all Gedalim. There were many Gedalim at the time, including Rav Sri Dublinsky, including Rav Sion Mitzafi, including Rav Mordechai Eliyahu originally, who did not want to sign on the Kol Kairei. And some of them said, I can't sign when you said it's usher. You want to say people should avoid going to Har Bayis, I can sign on that. But you want to say that it's usher to go, it's not usher to go.
That's really the big talking point. This is what I'm always talking about. Like, if a rabbi wants to give even if he wants to do it for all of Klal Yisrael, the big Rav wants to say, it's better not to, because then some people might go bituma, and clarify that, because then otherwise you're left with a terrible, terrible situation, which we are right now, where literally the masses of Klal Yisrael believe that something that is a mitzvah is usher to do.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not the first time in history that such a thing has happened. We know, for example, that when Ezra brought the Yidden back to Eretz-Yisroel, there were the Yidden there who didn't even know what Yom Kippur was, right? And they were all intermarried, right? The Gemara tells us about Esar Yichsan Elim Yibabel. It's not the first time that people thought that halachas were, in fact, averis, when they were actually mitzvahs. But it's our job to do the best that we can. And the very place that we're going to do it from, as the Nevi'im tell us, is from the base of English, from Har Bayis. That's the place where people are mischazik and to rebuild these ideas of getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Torah. So yeah, obviously, I'm trying to highlight two things. Number one, Rabbanim who publicly say it's aser might say it publicly, but privately they will admit or even give psak halacha for people to go to Har Bayis. And when asked them, and there's one very big Rav who I got my Psak Halacha to go, and everybody knows his name, and everybody respects him, and thinks he's one of the biggest poskim, and he is. And when I asked him about it, he said, it's a mitzvah for you to go, and it's a big mitzvah, but if you quote me on it, I'll deny that I said that. So I asked him, why? Isn't Teres Emes? He said, I'm not mechayiv to give up everything I've built because people will now no longer take me seriously because they'll say, oh, I'm someone who's matter aliyah l'har bayis.
So I suggest, if you haven't watched the full video of Beyond the Wall and the following video with Rabbi Yehudi Levi on Homebound to Eretz-Yisroel, that you check out that video. I'll leave a link in the description and watch the entire video, because a majority of the video is really trying to hammer in this question that we're going to address right now. And in the beginning of that video, he does mention Ramosha Feinstein. And this is on page 251 of the Igros Moshe in Yoredea. It's the Chelek Ches, number 8. That's what it's called. And it's on Yoredea Dalet. He says, the question is, that a rabbi can only give a psak halacha on something that is asked to him. That means he can only answer a question that's being asked about a specific case. And he says, even if there's permission that someone can actually write and say, okay, I decree that the whole world should not do something, there's no power to that. It's a halachic psak, meaning that this is the way they feel the halacha should be interpreted. V'rak b'Sanhedrin, and specifically in a Sanhedrin, meaning only if we had a Sanhedrin could such a halachic ruling be held intact. Meaning only a Sanhedrin can give a halachic ruling, legal ruling, on something which is a theoretical case. Only Sanhedrin can deal with the theoretics. This specific ruling of a Sanhedrin, who mamish lifneim, Sanhedrin, they will litigate on questions that have not come to them yet. Their purpose is to create an enactment of law that will be applicable at a time that has not arrived yet. But a smart person, a rabbi, his job is to do the exact opposite. Ramosha says that a rabbi's job is to answer questions on things that have already happened. And any type of writing halacha in a sefer is to teach. It's to teach how to learn, and meaning it's learning the topic. It is not considered a legal binding decision. V'yediyas HaTorah, and to know the Torah, kol mitzvah prate kol mitzvah, we are commanded to study Torah, and writing down piskei halachos, writing down halachot in a book, is fulfilling that mitzvah. Okay, so that's stage number one. Stage number two, levar shehira pi ma shenifsek b'sefer b'loi tam eino hayra klal. Number two, I will explain. Ramosha says that something that's written in a sefer, something that's written in a halacha sefer, and no reason is given, is nothing. It's not eino hayra klal. And he proves this from many proofs. We'll start reading. We'll see how it goes. It's possible if a rabbi will give a psak, he will say the halacha on a certain situation that came to him. Someone asked him, should I move to Eretz-Yisroel? And he gave a psak, he gave a halacha. But imagine if he did that based on what he read in someone else's book. But he didn't write in that book that he read, he didn't write a reason. There was no reason. He just said, yeah, everybody should move. He doesn't say a reason. That has no value. And another rabbi who thinks the opposite, and something that makes sense to him, he says a person could perhaps even permit it. Certain things that were forbidden, if no reason was given, if it was just a blanket rule, you can't go up to Har HaBayis, Isser Kares, like we saw, recently. So that doesn't have bind. And specifically, of course, if it's removing, if it's being machmer, it's making some stringency. Any form in Jewish law, in order to have a binding halacha, there has to be a reason. There's certain things that a rabbi can say as a way of teaching. So he says, what do we do when we look in books? What we're saying is that we saw that Ramosha said this. We saw that Rav Chazon Ish said this. We saw that the Chafetz Chaim said this in Mishnah Berurah. Right? And we know that this was a great rabbi. And we know that the Chafetz Chaim probably had good reason for everything that he said. And therefore, we're trusting the Chafetz Chaim. In other words, we're not trusting the psak. Now, this is very important because it's not just linguistics. And this is going because I understand, I've already learned through so much of this person, so much material. That's a very good reason to follow to somebody. And then he brings some proofs to this. And he says like this, Chazinan, we see, therefore, Gam achar chasimas hagemara shloi shayach lanu loimer tamim beduyim milvain. And then he says like this, L'chein, Gam achar chasimas hagemara, even after they finish the Gemara, we can't make up things. Lahavin taimi hagemara. All we can do is try to understand what the Gemara said. Hareitzvicher onu lahavin bedatenu mashim avur begemara. We need to understand the understanding of the Gemara, which will depend on how we explain the Talmud. Now, I want to just tell you something, a very large idea. Rav Moshe Feinstein was a genius, meaning he also had a very powerful way of understanding Torah. He did this very different than Rav Avadia Yosef. Rav Avadia Yosef may list tens, if not multiple different opinions and line them up and say 21 say like this and 19 say like this and follow the 21. Where Moshe would many times go and try to understand the underpinnings of things. And Gam Acha Chasimas Gemara, after we finish the Gemara, understanding the Talmud well will help us in making decisions. And this is the reason why we actually have debates. Bein Paiskim, Rishonim, Rambam, and Bali Taisus, the Rosh, all these different rabbis argue. The Paiskim Achronim Shulchan Aruch, Shuburoiv Dvarim Ka Rambam. Then you have the Shulchan Aruch. Most of the time, the Shulchan Aruch will be like the Rambam. And the Ramah Shu Beroiv Dvarim K'may Taisus. The Ramah usually follows Taisus. And then you get down in the Halacha. You get down to the Shach, Taz, the Magen Avram, the Sma, and you get, as you go through everything, everybody had their opinion, and all these stages of halacha, everybody had an opinion, and they were all great people. Now, today, a person needs to ask a new question. Can we do things that we haven't been doing, or something that hasn't been addressed? And this, and each one of these new cases, and he specifically lived in a time when he had to deal with the invention of electricity and many, many, many inventions that were invented. And Rav Moshe Feinstein was perhaps one of the, or if not the most dynamic rabbi who was most influential on the world today, there's perhaps not a religious Jew who doesn't know of him and doesn't understand the enormity of some of his halachos, some of his piskei tshuva, some of the things that he said, both as far as value of life, artificial insemination, many ethical questions. And he's developed this through his understanding. Sometimes if a person misjudges or misunderstands the Talmud, so his decision making, his process will be blurred. But if another rabbi were to come afterwards and come up with a different reason, so he could follow himself, even though that other person had a good reason then. Therefore, he says, and therefore, a person should never write a halacha sefer with just the answers. Why? He says, maybe you would think that people will only write just the psak halacha like my igros. That's what he's calling this, is just piskei. So he goes on and on, but the upshot of what he's saying is that halacha is a very dynamic thing, that it is based on previous understanding of Gemara, and previous understanding of Rishonim, and previous understanding of the Shulchan Aruch and the Nosei Kelim. And once we understand their ideas, we could apply it to other situations. And here, my friends, is the argument that I think Rabbi Yehuda Levi was making in that video. And I was speaking to Rabbi Singer about this. He mentioned there's another thing that can't be avoided. In 1967, there was also the possibility of having the Temple Mount. But at the time, although there was a lot of fear, what would that mean? And for 40 days, Rabbi Goren did have a shul, did have a synagogue, a beis medrash on Har HaBayis, in the first building on the right, which once belonged to, I believe, Yasser Arafat's family. But something very, very striking. You see, imagine that we did have access to it. Aside from all the halachic questions, which at that time weren't researched and well known, there was also the theological problem. Because if what had happened until 1967 was redemption and resulted in the liberation and the redeeming of the Temple Mount in its fullness, that would indicate that this is messianic. And this debate of whether or not what has happened and transpired up until 1967, rightfully so, may still have been, even though it was a huge miracle what happened in 1967, there were still people saying, well, most Jews are still in America or around the world, and the ingathering hasn't happened. But today, the argument is much stronger. And that's why Rabbi Singer said, many rabbis said, if we embrace the Temple Mount, and we say we want to make all Jewish people have the opportunity to do it correctly and to serve God and to bow down to God, that would seem to indicate that what has brought us to this point has been assisted by our brothers who are less holy than us. This is an idea that was, if it's not a good idea, it's my idea. But I think this was what Rabbi Singer was telling me. So some food for thought, something to think about. And please make sure to check out the full video. Thank you for watching. From the holy city of Beit Shemesh, Shalom.